Hello crew, welcome to the Rev Up. I'm your host Ben Shipley, Chief Growth Officer here at Trust the Process. Today on the show, we'll actually be running an interview that I did with Derek Gallimore on his podcast for Outsource Accelerator. We will be talking all things outsourcing, including how you should approach outsourcing, how you should approach building teams offshore, and all of the goodies in between from obviously Derek's experience, but also from my experience, not only running an offshoring business in Trust the Process, obviously where we hire offshore team members for small to medium-sized businesses, but also from my experience of having hired people in 30-plus countries over the years and having worked with globally dispersed teams, as well as using lots of outsourcing and offshoring for building my own teams and businesses. It's a great conversation. This actually runs on the Outsource Accelerator podcast channel as well, but we're bringing it to you here today as well. So please enjoy.
So Ben, tell us about Trust the Process. We had one of the two founders on the show not too long ago, actually, and it's an intriguing company, really taking a different perspective on offshore staffing. Give us the elevator pitch for what Trust the Process is.
Yeah, sure. I think you had Pete Liston out, one of our founders, on a little while back. I suppose the big thing with Trust the Process is we're not one of the really big BPOs out there. We've been around for a good sort of 4.5, 5 years. But actually, like, I suppose the interesting thing with Trust the Process is our two founders, Matt and Pete, are actually former military. Both spent a decade plus in the Australian Army as officers running sort of major logistics operations, which I know that there's a lot of stuff out there about, in the business world about, I suppose, military backgrounds. But if you were going to run a business, any background you could have from the military, logistics is the one you'd want, making sure, the right people have the right information at the right place and the right access to resources at the right time, all over the world and in some fairly extreme scenarios. And so, Trust the Process has been going for, as I said, about 4.5 years. And we take a very, I suppose, human-centered approach to outsourcing, as well as a very process-led approach. I know those two things seem a little counter to each other, but you absolutely can do them together. And so, we work very closely with SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises, really make sure that we help them, use outsourcing, use offshoring, as a strategy, as a way to save money and as a way to grow, but in a way that is really tailored to them. And as I say, very process-led so that they can get great results and know that they can kind of trust what it is that they're doing, trust who they're working with.
So I had Pete on the show, Pete Liston, and I believe Matthew as well. They both came out of the military, and I don't believe you have been in the military. So
No.
it is sort of military oriented in terms of how they implement whatever processes and build the organization. You as a civilian, Ben, how has it impacted you? What are your takeaways as a civilian sort of stepping into an organization that is influenced by the efficiencies of military?
Yeah. So look, my background personally, I've been in sales and marketing and sort of revenue generating roles since I was 19 years old, selling commission only on the mean streets of Melbourne. I've been hiring teams. I hired my first ever team member at 19 years old doing that commission only work. And since then, I've been all over the world, managed teams all over the world. I've hired people in 31 countries now, teams from just a few right through to a couple of hundred, set up contact centers and all of that sort of stuff. And coming into this business from that kind of background has actually been a perfect fit for us. Matt and Pete bring the rigors of their experience, bring the certainty and the control of their experience. and I bring, I suppose, the capabilities that come from having not been in the military but spent an entire career helping businesses build sales and marketing functions in particular. So I suppose like the biggest lessons for me have been there's so much crossover, there's so much similarity. A lot of the lessons that you learn in the military, that they learnt in the military, are very similar to some of the lessons that you learn when you spend a lot of time really building businesses, right? There are a lot of crossovers. There certainly are some differences and some things that we can just kind of learn from the military, particularly in how they, you know, systemize, um, and build, I suppose, like institutional knowledge that can be passed on, that can be scaled, that can be moved, that can be, um, you know, uh, used in other places at other times and different time zones and all that sort of stuff. That maybe is a little you get a little less in the regular sort of business world. But it's been a really good crossover, and great for me coming in and getting a different perspective, having kind of done my own versions for the past sort of 19 years or so.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It's a little bit like, um, you know, diets and diet fads, and there's always kind of like the latest diet. And I actually jumped headlong into keto, and then everyone
Yep.
moves on to paleo and all this sort of stuff. And
Yep.
there's endless kind of management books on how to run different organizations and different structures and EOS and things like that. But
Yep.
it is surprising actually that there's sort of so much military influence in the world, but actually there's not really kind of a military, what would you say, sort of philosophy in terms of running businesses, or certainly that
Mm.
has hit the mainstream. It's an interesting concept, isn't it? Because the military, of course, it's big, it's ever present, it's in most countries, and it has sort of a unifying philosophy to it. So
Yeah.
it is interesting to see it being applied to commerce.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the most interesting things is if you just look at Trust the Process as a business, Trust the Process as a business has grown very solidly every year that it has been in existence, right? To the point that for last year, we were included in the AFR's Fast 100 list, right? I only joined Trust the Process about 8 months ago, after my own uh, career and spending. I actually was a Pete and Matt at Trust the Process were partners of mine in my past life, um, and you can grow like that when you have a great product, when you have great service, when you have great systems and processes, which is obviously what Matt and Peter brought to this equation. Um, but you come in as someone like me who's spent their career helping to grow businesses and very much on the sales and marketing side, and we bring to at that point bring together my approach to sales and marketing and growth, and Pete and Matt's approach to systemized businesses. I mean, this isn't their first
Mm.
rodeo either. Bring those two things together, and you start to see some really significant growth, and some really significant progress. You know, they
Yeah,
have
it's
their
fascinating,
system
isn't it?
that
And
is
businesses
very
like
operational, right?
sorry, they really require all of that, don't they? Like sales is absolutely essential to a business, but also
Yep.
operations is absolutely essential to a business, and it takes people that are passionate about those different aspects to really make them hum. And Ben, maybe I'll tap into. So you are the chief growth officer of Trust the Process,
Yep.
and it's always a. I'm fascinated by the concept of selling, outsourcing, or offshoring, or
Mm.
staffing. I think to all of us in the industry, it is a no-brainer. You are able to access
Yep.
high quality staff at a significant discount, and then also you get the sort of operational oversight of people like Pete and Matt thrown in to help you with your business and your processes. It's a no-brainer, but it's actually surprisingly hard to sell. I thought getting into this game, within 10 years, every single business in the world would hire globally instead of locally. But
Hmm.
there's resistance and people still don't get it and people are scared of it. From a sales and growth perspective, what do you think about that generally, and how do you
Mm.
break through that resistance?
Yeah. So, look, I've used outsourcing for myself for years. I've had global teams for years, and so um, I totally agree with you. I came in with no resistance to the concept because it's something that I'd done for years and used very effectively for years. There certainly is some resistance, but I actually think that some of the resistance, and I apologize to anyone in the industry that gets caught up in this, but um, I think some of that resistance this industry causes for itself. There is a bit of a tendency to overpromise and underdeliver, or actually, I don't even think that's entirely accurate. I think there is a tendency to sell people what they're asking for, and this, to me, is where a lot of problems with outsourcing come from. Outsourcing should be simple. It's never easy, right? And no matter who you work with, you're going to have challenges. And I think what happens a lot is that someone comes into the concept of outsourcing, offshoring, whatever version they're going with, and they talk to someone. They say, "I want to solve a problem," and that organization says, "Great, we can help you with that. Let's hire somebody." They hire somebody, and that person tends to not work out. I think there has to be, if you're going to sell in this industry, there has to be some ownership from the outsourcing organization to really tell the customer the truth about what works and what doesn't. Um, you know, whether their strategy will work, whether the types of skills they're looking for is going to work, because you do enough of this stuff and you start to see some pretty consistent patterns of what does and doesn't work. I'm obviously very lucky in that I spent so many years using outsourcing that I have a good understanding of what does and doesn't work, all from my own trial and error. Um, and so I think that's a main thing is, if you're going to sell in this industry, it is harder because you really have to make sure that your customers have the right expectations. You really have to
Mm,
make sure that uh, you know, I think in a lot of sales, there is there is a tendency to maybe not give all of the information because you don't want to scare people off. I think in this industry, you have to really tell them what's going to happen, how it's going to be, what they can expect, what they should and shouldn't do, and you have to do that up front.
mm.
And I think where that hasn't been done, I talk to a lot of customers who are like, "I've tried it before and it didn't work for me. I got no results."
Mm.
And so there's a lot of overcoming that and really walking them through how to get results. You can't just help someone hire someone. You have to help them to learn how to be good at outsourcing, right? It's a skill in and of itself in business.
It is, yeah. I wrote a book, and I was sort of trying to write down the principles of outsourcing, and it sort of occurred to me as I was writing it's fundamentally just a standard management book. Like a
Yeah,
lot of the principles of outsourcing properly is really just managing a team properly, and
yeah,
it's about, as you mentioned earlier, delegation, not abdication. It's about building processes and not expecting sort of people to sort of run before they walk, um, and building a team. It's just sort of, there's
yeah,
no magic to it. What I think and I'm maybe guilty of this. Every week I'm on this podcast and I go, offshore staff are amazing, and outsourcing is amazing, but fundamentally it's just hiring staff, and hiring staff and building a team and running employees is it's really difficult, and
yeah,
it's not easy to run an organization. And you talk to employers anywhere in the world dealing with any staff anywhere, and it's a continual tension and a push and pull to get people productive, doing the right things, the right people on the right bus. And it's hard, isn't it? So I think when
yeah.
people sell the dream of outsourcing, it's almost like this utopian kind of employee that will just do everything without any complexity. But it's far from the
A
truth,
hundred
isn't it?
percent agree. And strangely, a lot of people expect that it will go more smoothly and it will be easier
Hmm.
than the challenges they have with hiring people onshore, maybe even in an office where the person's sitting next to them. right? They expect that the hit rate is going to be 100% when that's certainly not the case, even when you're hiring into an office environment in in the country that you're operating from. So it is funny. You do have to have some of those conversations, and just make sure that people are on the same page. But I totally agree with you. It is a matter of like offshoring. Good good offshoring is being great at managing remote staff. And if you've got remote staff, a thing I say to people quite often is whatever works with onshore in location staff, you need to do 150% of that for your offshore staff. Communication, you have to communicate more frequently. Think about all of the stuff that happens when somebody is in a location with you, where you see them on a Monday, you find out how their weekend was, you know that it's their birthday because somebody organized a cake. Like, just there's all these little non-work things that happen in an
Mm.
office that don't happen when somebody works remotely, that you would be surprised how big of an impact they have. So I tell people all the time, like, whatever you do that works, you need to do more of it, and you need to go out of your way to have non-work conversations with your remote staff, right? Like, I catch up with my team every day, and I never start a meeting with what's happening with work, right? And that to me has been a major learning. I think a lot of people learnt that, particularly when we went through all of the lockdowns and working from home with COVID. But we have to remember it. Like, that
Mm.
stuff's super important, and it's even harder if the person is remote.
And you mentioned, don't sell people what they are asking for, and it's intriguing, that, isn't it? And I can be a little, I suppose, pushy on the phone and kind of telling people what they want, and people generally don't like that, because they
Mm,
come in with their sort of preconceived notions, and you meant to just sort of clear the way. And it's really hard, isn't it, to kind of advise people on actually, you don't want a VA, you want a proper team member that can do the function, that has experience in that, and
mm.
build a team accordingly. Um, and It's hard. How do you find that people respond to sort of being nudged along into sort of a more ideal direction?
Um, I think it depends, right? So you certainly have some business owners, some managers, etc., that that do have some preconceived notions, some pretty locked in perspectives on things. And so for me, it's really about understanding where are they at in their journey. I like to ask everybody that I speak to, like, have you managed remote staff before? Have you outsourced before? Have you used offshore team members? Um, and really explore like where their experience is, because I speak to people every day who have been managing offshore team members for 20 years. In that case, I'm spending a bit less time telling them what they should do and what does and doesn't work, because uh, quite often they can tell me what works. But understanding where they're at in their journey, and then applying appropriate levels of advice, I think is really important. I'm not here to tell anyone um, how to do something they already know how to do, but I also need, I have a responsibility to our team members as well. And so, we're hiring people for long term roles. We don't work a lot in sort of project based work. And so most of the time, the best people aren't looking for work, and we're hiring people that already have a job. And so it is partially my responsibility to make sure that they're coming into a role that is going to work, not just for the clients, but for our team members. And so sometimes it takes a little bit of cajoling. But I think usually if you have the right level of knowledge and you can have a good conversation with somebody about what they're trying to do, and talk through from your experience what has and hasn't worked, and let people kind of make their own decision, but with all of the information. I don't tend to get a lot of I don't tend to get a lot of people telling me no, we're going to do this, even though you don't think it's the right thing to do. It happens pretty rarely. Look, I spent the last 3 years before I joined over at Trust the Process with one of Australia's largest business coaching organizations, teaching hundreds of members how to sell. And so, in terms of particularly when people come to us and they want to have a conversation about sales team members offshore, I've built multiple sales teams in the Philippines and in various countries around the world. And so, usually, that's a pretty easy conversation to have. But ultimately, like if you're going to tell someone how things need to be, you need to know what you're talking about, and you need to have good backing in order to be able to show why that's the case. But at the same time, and I know I'm kind of going on a bit here, but at the same time, not every client is going to be for us either, right? There might be somebody else that knows how to do something better than we do. And so for me, in those cases where somebody's got an idea of something they really want to do, I don't think we know how to do it. And I don't, but this person really knows what they're talking about and really wants to go ahead and do it. I'll usually just refer them to somebody else that we know that's better in that particular area. So I think, I suppose as an overall approach to that scenario is you also have to be willing to just, you're not just there to sell something to them that you don't know how to deliver. You have to be pretty honest about this stuff. Sometimes you'll get pushback. Sometimes you won't. Sometimes it'll fit. Sometimes it won't. But I think this is an industry more than any other I've ever worked in where we just have to be so honest with each other about what we can and can't do, and then make our own decisions from there about whether we should work together.
So when you're selling the dream of trust the process, what exactly are you selling? It varies enormously across the outsourcing industry. There's
Yeah.
many outsourcing suppliers that really just offer the staffing and facilities, and they hire the person suitable for your requirements. They get the green light from the client to hire that person, and then the management, the processes are up to the staff member and the client, pretty much emulating normal employment environment. But then there are BPOs that have fully managed services and provide the solution along with the staff. And then there's hybrids. Where does Trust the Process fit in that regard? If someone wants sales or marketing, do you come in and help build those processes, or are you just finding the appropriate staff to do that?
So I would say we fit somewhere in the hybrid grey scale. So the way that we work, because we pretty specifically work with SMEs, right? We've built our process, we've built our structure as a business around what works for those types of businesses, right? One of the challenges with fully outsourced, fully managed services ultimately ends up being that you go to offshoring for cost savings, and it doesn't end up being a significant cost saving by the time you factor everything in. And so we sit somewhere in the middle, but really we are hiring staff. We are hiring staff to be their staff, obviously through our books, but to be treated like internal members of staff. For the types of clients that we work with, though, you have to have more support than that, right? There's not many entrepreneurs out there that know how to do absolutely everything or have oodles of time to be able to manage absolutely everything that's happening around them. And so there's a couple of things that we find really important. The first one is you do have to have a focus on retention. Whilst a lot of people come to us looking for cost savings, your greatest cost in outsourcing is very rarely your hourly rate of the staff. It's usually in all of the time you have to spend when you get it wrong, when the person leaves, when you have to replace, all of that sort of stuff. And that's where a lot of people find it challenging. And so for us, like we pay a little bit above market rate to our team members. We pay them healthcare. and Social Security, and we pay them annual bonuses. And we do a lot of, like, I suppose, internal cultural work to try and make sure they have a great environment, and so that they stick around for the long term. And I think that's a really important element, particularly for the types of businesses we work with. Um, the second thing for us is that businesses don't have a whole heap of time. Most people in business don't have a whole heap of time to spare. And so sometimes they need a little bit of extra help, particularly in applying a localized context to how they manage people.
Mm.
I tell you that the greatest learning I've had with running offshore teams is you have to have an in-country counterpart. Um, and I give the example all the time. I worked for a company years ago, and apologies in advance to all of my American friends, nothing against you. But I worked in a company that had all American managers in Australia, right? And they just couldn't retain people because the business culture in Australia is fundamentally different than it is in the US, right? We're obviously very relaxed, um, maybe a little less formal, a little maybe being an understatement, and it just didn't work. They couldn't retain people. People were unhappy, but those were good people that were probably great managers in the US. And the
Mm.
same applies to wherever you're managing staff. You do need to have some localized understanding of cultural norms and the norms that exist within business and management. And that's been a major game changer for me. I'm very lucky. I have somebody in the Philippines that's been working with me the last few years. Big shout out to Bel Capistrano, um, who is essentially that person for me in the Philippines and has been at multiple places. And so for us, structurally, every single person that we hire for one of our clients has an internal um, team leader. Obviously, when we start to get to the size of teams that they need their own standalone managers, then we shift a little bit. But for most of our clients, they have an internal team leader that is there to, make sure people are logging in on time, working towards their tasks, that attends the training and the onboarding so they understand the tasks and they can give a little
Mm.
bit of extra
People
guidance.
need that, don't they? They need the
Yeah,
structure. They need the oversight.
yeah,
It's a sort of soulless place if everything's completely autonomous. Yeah, people actually need that, the
yeah,
structure, the
exactly,
hierarchy.
exactly. And I tend to find that small to medium sized businesses just need that little bit of extra support too. Um, and so that obviously also helps us with retention, having that internal team. We try and put people together in teams where they're doing similar work so that they don't always have to go to the client to get answers. They've two people that are in sales can often ask each other questions and get a little bit of help with a team leader that also comes from a sales background.
Mm.
So that's the other sort of major piece for us.
And I
um,
suppose we'll leave it on the ever sort of open debate of remote. What so Trusted Process is a fully remote organization, is that right?
yeah.
And what are your thoughts in terms of that? You yourself have been using sort of offshore and remote staff for many years now, it sounds, and an early adopter. But where do you see the whole future of that and the sort of potential and also the downsides?
Yeah, I totally understand when people want to have their team members in an office. I personally actually like being in an office, right? I like having a bit of banter with my colleagues and having a bit of fun and doing all those sorts of things. There is one major challenge, right? And I think this is so very true for us, and that is access to talent, right? We know that particularly during COVID and particularly in sales and marketing roles, a lot of people moved out of the major centers in places like the Philippines, right? And if you know, anybody who's been to Manila, if you happen to have an office in Manila, you can hire people from somewhere within about 8 kilometers of where that office happens to be, right? Because otherwise, they're just never going to be able to get to work. The commute's going to be too extreme. If you
Mm.
don't hire to an office, you can hire people from wherever there happens to be um, the right person with the right skills. You absolutely, as a business, trust the process included in that, have to be more strict about testing technology and testing internet connections and things like that. You have to provide a bit more support around making sure that those things are in place. Um, but having that remote aspect, it just has totally changed the volume of amazing candidates we can get because we can get them from wherever they happen to be. And so that's been really important for me. I think the hang up for some people is just getting their head around the idea that they want to be able to control someone and they feel like access and same location equals control. And the truth is, go into every office building that exists in the entire world and watch how no one knows what anyone's doing anyway.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So if you want to have to your point before about what you found writing your book, um, actually, whether it's remote or whether it's in an office, good control comes from good systems, right? This is something I learned from Pete from a military perspective, right? Control is consistency plus visibility. You don't have more visibility because you're in an office with somebody. You have visibility if you have good systems and good technology, and people are working through those systems and technology. Control plus visibility. Sorry, consistency plus visibility equals control. And that that takes us back to the points around having processes. Um, you you never outsource a problem, right? Never outsource a problem. Always outsource a process. If you outsource a problem, you usually get a bigger problem. If you outsource a process, you get efficiency. Um, and so wherever they happen to be, if you've got processes in place, you've got good technology to track them, you get control anyway. And actually, sometimes it forces people to put those things in place that they never had before, and they find actually they have more control than they've ever had.
It's interesting, isn't it? The whole world is really just grappling with this new sense of work and the future of employment and all that sort of stuff. And COVID has pushed the agenda forward. But, I was writing an article yesterday and I kind of reflected on it. Like, you think, like, and the way that I describe outsourcing is I say if you can do the job on a computer, then it can be done offshore.
Mm,
And in today's world, the vast majority of jobs are done on a computer. But computers have only really been around for 20 years.
mm,
It's such a short period of time. And you can imagine just prior to that, of course, everyone had to be within an office and kind of collaborating um, personally, physically. But now since everything, but it's just such a short period of time in our relative human history that everything is conducted across these computer interfaces. And so I think everyone's kind of really grappling with what is the new reality. And that's hard, isn't it? Because you've got sort of workplace efficiency, but then you've also got these softer things like culture and belonging and loyalty and enjoyment even. It's
yep,
fascinating. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. It is a space that like I've said before, I've been offshoring, I've been outsourcing for years. It's a space I'm really glad that I'm involved in as an outsourcer myself now. Um, it's because it's a people business, right? And I was talking with a client just recently about impact. Um, it is amazing the impact you can have on the lives of your team members when you are hiring somewhere remote. Um, Sometimes just the difference um, of what we might perceive to be a small amount of money makes a huge difference. That's why it's cheaper in some of these countries. And so, getting to be in a business where we are making great jobs, great jobs with great clients for great people in remote locations that really make a big impact and change their lives. that to me is a great business to be in. It's obviously a good time to be in outsourcing, but I absolutely love what we get to do because of the human aspect of it. We are in a human business, right?
It's fascinating, isn't it? And it's so quickly changing. And I think over the next 20 years, we're going to see incredible sort of seismic shift in what it means
Mhm.
to work and employ, and it's all going to go towards one kind of global unified workforce, I believe, and it's
Yeah.
really going to change quickly.
Watch
Fascinating.
how some of the technologies end up just replicating. How can you force a remote worker to appear to be in an office?
Hmm.
That's my prediction.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
my
yeah,
prediction.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I do wonder what's going to replace it. I think people
Mm.
still need belonging, and I fear for a future where we're relatively formed in our personality and lives now, but the sort of 20-year-olds that are graduating from college, and if their entire career is in their bedroom, in their pajamas, switching
Mm.
between TikTok, work, and Netflix, I sort of worry for that future a little bit, but
There's
it's
an amazing book that I've just finished reading called Stolen Focus by an author named Johan Hari that talks about this quite a bit. It is a major challenge. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be worked out. But one of the things that somebody said to me recently, there's a whole generation of people entering the workforce that have never lived without Facebook.
mm,
And that
mm,
is, having been one of the first people on it, being around in those really early days, it's kind of amazing to think.
yeah. And like you and I, we're sort of relative pioneers in terms of adopting remote, and I think sort of, and but to those kids, the sort of, I don't know, millennials or Gen Z, once they are 35 making hiring decisions, it will be a completely different bag. I mean, to them,
Mm.
it's just they're native in
Yep.
chat rooms and WhatsApp, and not native to offices. So it's their hiring decisions are going to be completely different. Huh?
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm very interested to see what comes. Uh, very interested to see what solutions are found for improving the lives of remote workers and improving culture. Um, there's so much we can do. It is an exciting space to be in. There's a lot we can do now, and I think that generally most businesses need to focus more on the cultural aspects and making people feel a part of something bigger than themselves, feel like they're really contributing to something beyond themselves. And you can definitely do that remotely.
Fascinating. Huh? What an exciting future we all face. Ben, thank you so much. As always, I encourage people to reach out to have that conversation and to even be challenged by Ben, and to really get to the core of maybe what you need and how offshoring can help. So reach out, have a conversation. Ben, if people want to learn more, how can they get in touch?
Well, the two simplest ways are number one, you can always find us on the Outsource Accelerator platform, of course. You can also find us at www.trusttheprocess.com.au.